episode of I Love Data Fridays here at the International Data Evaluation Center on the campuses of the Ohio State University. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of I Love Data Fridays, episode 53, titled I Am a Data Investigator. And before we get into it, who's talking data to you? Well, of course, you've got me, Jeff Breimer-Bashore, Director and Co-Principal Investigator here at the International Data Evaluation Center. And as I stated earlier, today's episode title is I Am a Data Investigator. And by I mean you are a data investigator. So today, we're going to practice repeating a little mantra to ourselves to increase and boost our confidence about our data investigation skills, because we are in that time of season where everyone has their reports from the previous school year and they're starting to dig into their data and starting to make observations and look for trends. So I thought it was nice to be good to have an episode about some techniques and strategies that you can use to investigate your data and to reassure you that you are a data investigator. So let's practice here. We're going to do a little repeat after me. So repeat after me. I can do this. I am a data investigator. Excellent. All right. So besides working on our confidence, we're also going to revisit some data investigation principles and go over those and talk about those briefly. Then I'm going to model a data investigation technique for you, and I've just sort of have this is sort of my name of this technique. I call it the zoom in, zoom out technique. It's a technique that was used in the article that was written by Amy Smith and Beth Moxie and Amy Emmons. They sort of used this zoom in, zoom out data technique, though they didn't quite call it that. I've just given it that moniker. And then I'm going to give you an example outline that I've used for doing data sessions with teachers. So I've had some teacher leaders lately bring me in for their per PD with their teachers and lead a data session with their teachers. So I'm going to provide you an example of that outline, and you can choose to use it, ignore it, or modify it as you like. And then finally, everyone's got a little homework, but I promise it's not boring homework where you're going to go crunch numbers. I want you guys to go listen to a podcast, and I'll tell you about it at the end of the episode about your homework for data investigation. All right, well, let's get to it, and let's talk a little data. I love Data Friday! All right, let's repeat after me real quick because we want to work on that confidence today, like I said, because we are data investigators. Here we go. I can do this. I am a data investigator. Excellent. I knew you guys were data investigators. I'm so glad to hear you say that. Okay, let's get into it. Let's talk about some of our data investigation principles. You will have probably heard me say these already before from my sessions that I did at the Teacher Leader Institute, but they are still relevant and still useful now. So our first principle is, do not start this process with answers already in mind. If you do that, then you've already lost the game. You won't allow yourself to go and learn and dig deep into your data. We have a quote below from a teacher leader here that we used back at the Teacher Leader Institute, and she said, "The process helped me embrace a curiosity towards my data with one question leading to another rather than asking a question to lead to an answer." All right, so don't start with those answers already in mind. Now, data analysis is often circuitous, yet always disciplined. And I hope I hope you see this when we go through the zoom in, zoom out technique. When we do the zoom in, zoom out technique, a lot of times we spot something, we zoom in, take a closer look at the data. Sometimes we don't find anything and we zoom back out, or if we do find something, we zoom back in. So this always zooming in and zooming out are the disciplined part of it, but sometimes when we zoom in, we don't find something. So sometimes we run into dead ends, and that's completely normal. But we stay disciplined about it. Remember, you possess intimate knowledge about your implementation, so you are going to see things in your data that when an outsider looks at it, they may not understand what is happening at all, But you, with your knowledge about what's going on in your schools and your districts, you possess some knowledge and intimate information about what's going on. So use that and be able to fill in those gaps if you need to. And remember, data are neutral. They aren't judging us, all right? Data are like that friend that we have that can speak real to us. You know, that friend that can give us that criticism and then tell us when we're being boneheads, and we don't get upset about it because they're that kind of friend, all right? Data are that kind of friend. They aren't neutral. They aren't going home, and they aren't talking to their spouses about how our sites are doing anything, all right? Data are neutral. Acknowledge the complexity of our theory and systems. So acknowledge the complexity of the theory and the systems of reading recovery. And if you wondered why sometimes the data analysis around reading recovery data is hard, it's because the shit is hard, okay? Reading recovery is complex, and it makes our data a bit complex. There is no sort of one answer to thing. It's usually a multiple angles of stuff that we have to look at. So if you're thinking to yourself, man, this shit is hard, welcome to the club. Yes, it is, and that's okay. But we can get through this because, you know, oh, well, I'll save our mantra to the next screen. And finally, I would just want to say, make observations when you look at your data, all right? Don't worry about whether an observation is meaningful or important. Just write it down, okay? Make observations. Decide its importance later. Just make observations. And finally, don't get stuck. Don't get stuck on a table wondering if something is meaningful or not meaningful. Set yourself, for example, like time limits, all right? You'll see this, how I do this when I show you the teacher session that I led, how I set time limits on it. Don't get stuck. If something doesn't make sense or you're not liking it, or just move on. That's okay. Move on and come back later. All right, here we go. Let's get back to our mantra. Repeat after me. I can do this. I am a data investigator. Excellent. I still knew you guys were data investigators, and I'm so happy to hear that. All right. So moving on to a discussion about zoom in and zoom out data investigation technique. All right. So you'll see here on the screen that on the left-hand side, I have the phrase zoomed out. And on the right-hand side, I have where it says zoomed in, all right? And basically what I'm referring to are different, looking at data at different levels of sort of granularity, all right? And so we start out at the zoomed out when we want to go do our data investigation. We're going to look at our data in the aggregate. So what that means is we're going to use tables, charts, and on-demand reports that show averages. So not actual student scores, but averages of scores. And we will want to start with reports that are at a site or district level, okay? Those are sort of aggregate levels of reporting. When we get down to a building report, that becomes more student level data that we're looking at. And when we're zoomed out, we can look for systemic issues. We can begin to make our observations. And then when we find something interesting, we can zoom in, okay? So zooming in goes to our next level, and that is examining variation, all right? So we're going to start. Now we've looked at things in the aggregate. We've found something interesting, and we can zoom in and now look at like some variation in the data. So we're going to use tables and charts and on-demand reports that show that variation. And we're going to continue to make observations, and we're going to look for clusters, all right? Clusters of data or little patterns in the data right there. If you find something interesting, you can zoom in to the next level. If you don't find anything interesting at all, you can zoom back out. So this goes back to this principle that our data investigations are often circuitous yet disciplined. So you notice here that it acknowledges I may not find anything when I come into this next level, and I just have to go back up and start looking at data in the aggregate in. But that's the discipline part of this, okay? So now, if we do find something interesting, we can then zoom into our last level, and we can start examining individual student data. So this means we can start using tables, charts, and on-demand reports that show individual student data. We can continue to make observations, and whereas the level above we were looking for clusters, we can now examine the clusters. We can ask questions like, are clusters happening just in one school or spread out? Now, if you don't find anything interesting at this level, you can zoom back out, and you can choose to zoom back all the way back out to the aggregate, or even up to the next level, back up to variation. It's up to you. Remember, it's okay. We're going to sometimes have these dead ends, but remember, we're going to be disciplined about it. We're going to zoom in, zoom back out. So this is a strategy that you can use with the IDEC reports to do your data investigation, this zooming in and zooming out of your data. All right, so I just wanted to show some quick examples of tables or figures that you can use at the different levels of zooming in, zooming out. So remember, our first level was looking at data in the aggregate. So you can use figure 8 to begin an investigation of looking at data in the aggregate. So we can make observations about this data. And the reason why this is aggregate is because this chart, I happen to pick a figure 8 that is coming from a site report. So remember that our site reports generally have aggregate data, data about the whole site, not just individual students. This particular chart happens to show average scores, so we're not looking at individual scores, we're looking at averages, we're looking at data in the aggregate. Now, the one thing about looking at data in the aggregate is, remember, it hides the details, okay? But that's why we zoom in. So the reason why we use the data in the aggregate is it hides the details, it removes the distractions and the clutter, and hides that using, sort of these aggregate analysis features. And if we find something interesting, we move in. And another thing is that these tables and charts can reveal possible systemic issues. So for example, in this chart, though I see really great acceleration on these first round discontinued children, they didn't quite make the same amount of acceleration that we typically saw in the United States. And that was for both the first and second round students. So revealed possible systemic issue here. Now, I'm not using systemic as like bad. I'm just saying it could be something that is like school district wide that you may have to think about or address. So we can zoom in and look farther. So now let's move down to our next level. We've zoomed in and we're going to an example of examining variation. All right, so this is the table 5 that is showing the count of reading recovery students by their year-end text level. And it's showing variation by text level. So it's showing the number of students by that text level. So that is that variation that we're looking at, all right? And we can begin to, once again, this is at a site level. So I'm looking at data at the site level. I haven't really gone down to a district, but I've looked at variation within the site. And it does provide a little more detail. So I'm actually getting counts of individual students. I'm still zoomed out a little bit. I'm not looking at the individual students, but it's telling me a little more detail. And it's revealing clusters. So you'll notice that I have that little square on my screen. One thing that jumped out at me is that we had 3 progress students this year that made to a text level 16 at the end of the school year. So a nice example of what I think is like sort of like a little positive deviant, a little small cluster in our data. So maybe this is something we can zoom in and look at. So let's do that. Let's move into our last example where we're zoomed all the way in and we're looking at individual student data. And we are looking at an example from the on-demand report that's called the Student Data Summary. All right, so the Student Data Summary provides you some summary information about each student that you've served during the school year. So in this example, I wanted to find one individual that is a part of that cluster. So you can see that there on the screen here. I found one of our progress students with a year-end text level of 16 right there. Now, I have all the names blurred out and everything, but now I would have a name, and we could, if we wanted to, go and investigate, the teachers and I could go investigate this data, and what could we learn from this small cluster of positive deviants that we found in our data. And you can also start to answer some questions like, are these clusters in one school or many schools, okay? So you can look at things like that. So there you go. These are some example tables that provide us those types of information, that aggregate, that data that shows variance, and then finally individual student data. All right, let's get back to our mantra. I want everyone to repeat after me. I can do this. I am a data investigator. Excellent. I still knew you guys were data investigators. All right. Now, we're getting to the part where I want to talk to you about or share with you data sessions that I've been doing with teachers, how I sort of run these data sessions. And then you guys can feel free to use them, adapt them in any way you want. So before I get into what I've done, a few things that these sessions that I do is, one, I try to make sure, if you're going to do something, try to make sure you create what I call like a data-safe environment. Like, we're not trying to judge anyone today. Remember, data are neutral and they aren't judging us, but it can feel like they're judging us. And especially with teachers who are, emotionally invested in the students that they're working with, it can be some, we could show some particularly biting information that might cause some hurt feelings. So at times, if you need to remove names of schools from reports or hide them, do things like that. Create a data-safe environment. Set some data boundaries, mostly time boundaries. It's easy to get lost in the data and to get overwhelmed. So set boundaries that you can live within, that keep you focused and on task, and don't make people feel overwhelmed. Make sure you actually leave lots of time to talk about data. I sometimes have a problem. I love to hear myself talk. I know you all are just like, that's a big surprise. But leave lots of time to talk, for people to talk data in groups to themselves, because that is when all of this beautiful inquiry and discussion things reveal themselves during this talk time. So leave ample time, take time to set up things and move things along and to provide structure, but leave lots of time to talk. So the example I'm going to give today is an example of a 90-minute session that I did. And as I was saying kind of earlier, so if you're following, I've been trying to follow a theory of improvement, and part of one of the mantras of improvement theory is that a theory of improvement is always evolving, it's possibly wrong, and almost certainly incomplete. So today, what I present to you is not what I would say is like the ultimate session for teachers, but this is what I've done. This is what I've been creating. It's changed every time I've done it. Please use this. Please adapt this. Please share this. And if you think of a way to improve it, just email me and let me know how you improved it, okay? So, all right, here we go. So normally when I start with sessions with teachers, I establish some truths about data. So I always tell them, data are neutral and they aren't judging us, to try to sort of assuage this fear of like people are going to be judging to me today in my work, all right? The next thing I tell them, like I said to you guys earlier, that we have to acknowledge the complexity and the theory of our reading recovery systems, and that shit is hard. And that makes data analysis hard sometimes. There is no easy answer in there, all right? It's usually a combination of things. So acknowledge that it's hard, okay? Now, if we do good, powerful inquiry, it should leave us with as many questions as answers. So remember, we're not on the hunt for answers today. We're on the search for questions, okay? And as I also said in a previous screen, I always tell people, here in reading recovery and in our personal data analysis, we're trying to improve. So we're going to adopt a theory of improvement. And a theory of an improvement is always evolving. It's possibly wrong and almost certainly incomplete. And that's okay. Next time we do this with your teachers, it'll get better. All right, next I try to establish goals with our teachers, like what are we trying to accomplish today? One of the things I tell them is that today is all about making observations. We are not making answers. Well, I think I've jumped ahead. So we're going to look at the data, and we are just going to make the observations. We are not going to worry about if the observations are meaningful or important. If we see something, we're going to write it down. See something, write it down. Worry about its importance later. We're going to zoom in and zoom out of our data. So just as I showed you guys examples of, looking at figure 8 and then we zoomed in to table 5, you can do the same thing. And I will show you a list of the tables, but I tell the teachers that we're going to zoom in and zoom out of our data to look at it in different ways. Now, today, to help set the boundaries, we can't address everything. Our data is going to reveal a lot of things that we might want to address. But what we're really on the hunt for today is we're looking for that low-hanging fruit. These things that we can change quickly or address quickly. And then you'll notice on the screen here I have two things crossed out. Today we will not have answers. We will not be writing down any answers. We will not be trying to look for answers. We are only on the hunt to make observations and ask questions. And today there is no child-centered blame. It goes along with this answer. Sometimes we want to say, well, the child wasn't motivated. There is no child-centered blame today when we're in this session. Okay, so I tried to establish some roles within the group. I tell the teachers that today they are the leaders, the data investigators, and the observers today. That they are a crucial role in this and leading all of this. They are the data investigators and leaders. Now, I would normally have myself in the second bullet if I was leading. Teacher leaders, you could substitute yourself in here as the neutral voice, sort of play that role of data, be data's neutral voice, and be that discussion facilitator to help move things along and pose ideas. And I sometimes even challenge back on some of the observations that are made, though I usually wait till we get into the middle and people feel comfortable with making observations before I start challenging anything. And then finally, it's nice to have a volunteer or two that can actually record our observations and questions. That way they don't get lost during the session. So if you could have one or two volunteers just record all of the observations or questions that sort of get thrown out. All right, here is the plan. Here is what we are going to do and follow. So the first thing we're doing is we're going to take the temperature of our data. All right, we're just going to broad overview and take the temperature. So we're going to break the teachers into groups, however you want to break them up. And then on a single screen, we're going to look at the following pieces of data. We're going to look at Figure 8, Table 3, Table 4, Table 5, Table 6A, and then the OS scores by school on-demand report showing the total scores. And I did this with the school names removed because remember, I'm not trying to hurt anyone's feelings. We're trying to remain neutral. So if you can do that, do that. Now, you're going to show each figure or chart or table for 3 to 5 minutes. All right, 3 to 5 minutes per chart or table. And then each of the groups are going to quickly record their observations. I always emphasize no answers. Discuss, quickly record your observations, and then at the end of that 3 to 5 minutes, each group will share their observations. And it's normal that they all kind of have the same or similar observations, and that's fine. It means that if that happens, that's great. That's no problem. It just means everyone is on the same page about stuff. If I hear people talking about answers like, oh, well, that's because, no answers. Observations. No answers, observations. All right, so after we go through all those tables, taking 3 to 5 minutes per each of those tables or charts, then we do some discussions in our groups, an open discussion time, all right? So, and this is, you can give about 10 to 15 minutes to do this. So based on the observations that people just recorded, each group now must produce 3 questions. So all those observations that we just had, each group must produce 3 questions, no answers. Okay, no answers. And then at the end of that 10 to 15 minutes, the groups can share their questions. And then hopefully what you're really hoping for is that they're going to ask for some additional data. So we want them to share their questions and what other data do we want to look at to be able to investigate further. And then finally, if at the closing, after everyone shares their things, chances are you're going to have a lot of questions. I recently just did one about a week ago, and we left the session with about 10 or 11 questions that I had to go and do some data pulse, some additional data, had to make 10 different slides, and that's great. But maybe for you guys, it's something that you want to prioritize. Like, did we find some low-hanging fruit that we want to change, and we want to prioritize them? That way you're not feeling overwhelmed about stuff. Because remember, our data is going to show us a lot of stuff, and we're on that hunt for the low-hanging fruit. So you can prioritize which things you want to look at. And then you can decide on what data you want to look at to help you investigate your questions. So that concludes how I would run a session. Obviously, that wasn't a full 90 minutes because I've tried to leave a lot of time for that discussion. Most of me was just describing what I was going to have you guys do. I did talk through how I set up the sessions there and everything, but notice that we've got a lot of time for data discussion in there. Now, do you need some help? If you wanted to lead some teacher professional development and you wanted to really look at data, I can be a participant in that in your teacher professional development. I can act as that neutral voice, and I can come prepared with data. Or if you're just going to do it yourself and you just need some more data, or you already did it with your teachers and you guys need some more data, contact me. Here's my email address, my phone number. I would be more than happy to pull data for you and your teachers so you guys can investigate that data and get down to what's really going on and improve what's going on in your reading recovery sites. All right, let's repeat after me one last final time. I can do this. I am a data investigator. Awesome. Awesome. I knew you guys were data investigators. I mean, I knew it right here in my heart of hearts. All right, it is now time for your homework. Now, I've promised that this is not a horrible data lesson or anything. It's actually just listening to the podcast. So I want you guys to either go to your web browser or open up Spotify or whatever you listen to podcasts on, and I want you to do a search for the podcast, an episode of a podcast that's called The Bone Reader, and it's a part of the podcast that's called Snap Judgment. That's the URL right there for it, snapjudgment.org/episode/the-bone-reader. If you get to that webpage and it looks just like that, you're at the right spot. The Bone Reader. Let me get to my slides here. Now, just a minor warning that it does contain some descriptions of forensic science. So it's nothing horrible, but if you're just like, oh my gosh, Jeff, we talked about disembodied heads here in this one. Yes, it does, and it discusses some forensic science, but I promise it doesn't really get into anything really gory of that nature. But what I really want you guys, so you're just like, this is crazy, Jeff. Why are you so excited about this episode? It's because I want you to listen to this episode with your data investigator hat on. This episode has nothing to do with data, or the premise of the episode has nothing to do with the data. It's a mystery. They're trying to solve a mystery, and it's a real-life mystery. But I want you to listen how the forensic artist makes continuous observations. So she does this beautiful job of describing how, for the police and in her own work, how she goes about investigating this strange mystery that they have, all right? And she makes these continuous observations, which we talk about how we need to do in our data. She draws upon her personal knowledge and experience to fill in sort of some holes or mysteries or things that she's seeing, which remember how we talk about that you possess intimate knowledge about your implementations. She talks about how she wrestles with police cultural norms. So sometimes when you guys run up against cultural norms in school districts or something, she runs into the same thing. And then, this sort of causes her to have sort of this self-doubt about what she has to offer, even though she has an incredible amount of information and expertise to offer. And spoiler alert, she actually knows the answer to this mystery. And then on the other side of this, I want you to listen to how the police in this investigation, they start with making observations, but they jump to conclusions. So instantly, it's a serial killer, all right? And it must be some strange sort of serial killer. And because they're not listening to the evidence or are being trapped by sort of their own cultural norms, they begin to sort of spin their wheels or not listening or taking any advice from the experts, and the expert being this forensic artist. And they waste all sorts of time just grinding through different types of analysis and investigation instead of listening to the observations and the evidence. So take a listen to it. It's a great story, even if you don't listen with your data hat on. I think it's a wonderful one to listen to. But But if you can just embrace the way that this forensic artist just makes observations and draws upon her experience to help try to solve a crime, doing these same things will help you investigate your own data. All right, one last time. Repeat after me. I can do this. I am a data investigator. I knew it. I knew you guys were data investigators right from the moment I started this episode. So awesome. All right. Well, folks, this is the end of this episode of I Love Data Fridays. Whoops, the arrow went right past that subscribe button. But hey, if you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing to our channel. And let me cue the music. Thank you for watching this episode of I Love Data Fridays. I wish you guys good luck and have fun this year looking through your data and doing your data investigations. And as I always say, hey, we will talk data to you later.